Hi, this is Tara. Let's study Sutra 5. What does it say? It says vṛttayaḥ, pañcatayyaḥ, kliṣṭā'kliṣṭāḥ. Vritti, you already know, vṛttayaḥ is the plural. The vrittis, pañcatayyaḥ, are fivefold. Kliṣṭā'kliṣṭāḥ and akliṣṭā'kliṣṭāḥ. That is, they are painful and they are non-painful. And Maharishi Ved Vyasa says these have to be restrained. So it's very simple, but what does it actually mean? So he says that there are fivefold manifestations of the mind. Fivefold meaning that everything you perceive, every modification happens each in 5 different ways. Okay, what those 5 ways are, we will study in Sutra 6, 7, 8, 9. For now, all you have to know is there are fivefold manifestations into painful and non-painful. What does this mean? So I see this cup, I'm seeing it with my eye. The organ is one. It can be painful, oh it's too hot, or it can be pleasant, oh it's just right, like Goldilocks. Okay, so the modification is twofold, but painful, non-painful, but the organ is one, the vritti is one. Okay, in this way there are fivefold manifestations, modifications, and this applies to everything in the world. Now what does he explain? That the painful are those which cause afflictions and become the field of growth for the vehicle of actions, that is the karma saya. So if it is painful, it mires us in, we react, and it becomes the field of growth of our actions. We get sucked into karma. And the non-painful are those that have us use discrimination, viveka, for the object of perception, and maybe we can stay detached. Okay, so one thing I wanted to clarify is that the gurus do not use painful and non-painful in the way that you and I use it. When a teacher, especially of Buddhism or yoga, is talking about pain and non-pain, he's not just talking about pleasantness. Painful is typically that which enmeshes us in samsara, that takes us away from our liberation. And pain-free is that which frees us from samsara, the cyclical, vortex. And to be pain-free means we are moving towards our liberation through that action. I'll give you an example. Let's say you get married, right? Very nice, you're in love, it looks very happy. It's akliṣṭā'kliṣṭāḥ, it's pleasure, but it enmeshes you in the cycle of samsara. Sex, as BKS Iyengar gives in his bhashya, okay, will be very pleasant. It will lead you to child labor, okay, the labor of giving birth, which can be very, very painful. But then it goes into the cycle of delivering the child and the joy of having a child, which can be pleasant. So what Maharishi Ved Vyasa is saying by this is the painful is embedded in the pain-free, and the pain-free is embedded in the painful. So each is intermingled and coexists separately and at once. Let us look at what Swami Satyananda has to say. He says that the modifications are fivefold, and this means that the modifications of the mind are 10 in number. Okay, and to illustrate, 5 are painful and 5 are non-painful. The mind sees a flower, it likes the flower, this is called akliṣṭā'kliṣṭāḥ, or pleasant. Then your mind sees a crushed, decomposed body of a dog that has been run over by a vehicle, and this is unpleasant, so this is kliṣṭā'kliṣṭāḥ. Okay, so the particular modification of the mind in this case is the modification is the same, it is through the eyes, but depending on where it goes to kliṣṭā'kliṣṭāḥ or akliṣṭā'kliṣṭāḥ. Okay, what are these 5 vrittis? We will study them later. But what you have to understand, what is Patanjali sort of explaining in the sutra, is that everything you see, everything you interact with, every perception of the mind, every manifestation of chitta is a modification of vritti. Now, what is vritti? He explains through the words of the 7th century scholar Gauda Padacharya, who was the guru of Adi Shankaracharya, who said in his commentary on the Mandukya Upanishad that the whole world seems to be nothing but one of the forms of mental modifications of a supreme consciousness. So, what is not vritti? The very fact that there is a world to live in and experience and interact with is a vritti of the mind. Your jealousy is a vritti, your anger is a vritti, your pride is a vritti, your longing is a vritti, your love is a vritti. Everything is a vritti, is a modification of the mind, every thought. And in yoga, even the state, Swami Satyananda says, even the state of sleep is a vritti, dream is a vritti, doubt, illusion, mistakes in thinking, perception, like looking at a rope and thinking it's a snake, that is also a vritti. So what he says is that not only the earth but the entire cosmos may not be real. It is a modification in yoga of the mind. So let's look at what Swami Vivekananda says. He keeps it very simple. He says there are 5 classes of modifications: painful and not painful. BKS Iyengar, okay, he says when consciousness takes a lead, when chitta is taking the lead and you're perceiving, then the seer takes a back seat, right? And the seed of modification is the consciousness, is in consciousness, not in the witness. It is not in the seer. Your chitta is the one that is creating the vritti. These vrittis manifest 5-fold, okay? And the consciousness involves the seer. What does this mean? What is the meaning of 5-fold? The consciousness, chitta, involves the seer with the object of perception in 5 different ways, through 5 different means. So there's the witness, the seer, the original Purusha, mired by chitta, okay, which is all the gunas. These manifest in 5 different ways. The arising thoughts associated with anguish are kliṣṭā. And BKS Iyengar gives a beautiful example. He says a live coal covered in ash, when you touch it, you are burnt. When it was covered in ash, it was non-cognizable, it was a kliṣṭā. It looked okay. You touch it, you're burnt, that is kliṣṭā. So the pain is dominant in kliṣṭā. But and here he gives the example, pleasure of sex, then you have the pain of childbirth, and then you have the joy of the child coming into the world. So pleasure and pain coexist in each other. Inside the kliṣṭā is kliṣṭā, inside the kliṣṭā is kliṣṭā. Okay, and he notes that in Sutra 19, Patanjali warns that even highly enlightened souls who may have reached the painless blissful state described, that though the yogi may be free when certain virtuous potencies are dominant, when they fade, the yogi must strive again. Okay, so pain can be hidden for a very long time until it rises to the surface and reveals itself as painful. So we are, as long as we are in this world, we are never entirely free, because we have the body, and the body itself is a vritti. Its actions are vrittis. So Prakriti causes modifications to arise in kliṣṭā form, and he says Purusha causes afflictions to arise in akliṣṭā form. That is the distinction that BKS Iyengar teaches. For example, memory is bondage in Prakriti, but the faculty of discrimination in Purusha. If you remember in the previous sutra, he explains that every vritti has a higher form and a lower form. The higher form being Purusha and the lower form, the base form, being Prakriti. So memory in Prakriti is bondage and it is discrimination in Purusha. And both states can be either hidden or revealed, and both must be stopped by yogic practice. If Chitta is the wheel, kliṣṭā and akliṣṭā are the 2 spokes that cause fluctuations. The vrittis that manifest from them feed into and support each other. So Osho, he says the modifications of the mind are 5. They can either be a source of misery or non-misery. And he says basically the mind is what makes heaven or hell. Okay, and he says you and your mind cannot sustain simultaneously. One or the other has to disappear. You're in misery because you're following the mind. You're not its master, but its slave, and it's an instrument. So, if a Buddha wants to speak to you, he has to use the mind to convey consciousness as speech. As I said, we are subject to Vrittis as long as we are in the body. Okay, you go to him the second time and he remembers you. Yeah, I've seen you before. Okay, that is memory. So that is the second modification. So the mind has to be used, but remember that a Buddha uses the mind. It has no hold over him. You're not subject. The aim of yoga is not to be subject to the Vrittis, but to control them. Okay, mind is not separate from the body, in a state of the body that is deeply subtle. So mind is, what Osho is saying is that, for instance, when you take in alcohol, you drink bodily, but what does it affect? It affects the mind. So the mind is the subtle form of the body. It is not separate from the body. And he says the body has 5 organs, indriyas, activity, 5 function. Mind has 5 functions. Mind and the body are one. But the expression of the mind through each of these creates 5-fold manifestations. And each of these modifications can cause dukkha, afflictions, or pleasure or pain. And the word non-misery, Osho points out, is very important. Patanjali doesn't say it will lead you to ananda or bliss. He is very precise. At best, the manifestation of the mind through the body that leads you to a kliṣṭā'kliṣṭāḥ can cause non-misery. He is not saying it's going to lead you to bliss, which is a lasting bliss. Okay, it's a very important distinction. And Barbara Stoller Miller says the turnings of thought, whether corrupted or immune to the forces of corruption, or are 5 kinds. And she uses the word corruption for misery arising out of modifications. Okay, because it is a corruption of the purity of the self. So she gets into the details of what is this corruption in the next sutras, or in sutras 4 to 9 of the second pada. But the forces of corruption, klesha, she says, arises out of ignorance, its basic manifestation, through our contact with phenomenal existence, and motivates our actions in the world. Therefore, Patanjali, what Maharishi Ved Vyasa says, is that it creates the field of action. Okay, it creates the field by which we are getting enmeshed more in our karmas. Okay, so only by distancing ourselves from this chaos through yoga can we diminish the power of the corruptions over us, and the subtle and benign workings of thought are obstructions to freedom. This was Sutra 5. Thank you so much for listening, and I will get back to you with Sutra 6.